Florida Prize in Contemporary Art has been postponed 1 year due to the coronavirus pandemic. In anticipation of the upcoming exhibition, we're doing studio visits with each of the artists. My name's Hansen Mulford, I'm the curator.
And I'm Coralie Claeysen-Gleyzon, associate curator. And today we're visiting with Kedgar Volta. Hi, Kedgar.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very good, very good. Happy to see you.
Yes, you too. It's been a while.
For anybody who doesn't know about your biography, you did come here from Cuba in 2008.
That is correct. I'm originally from Cuba. I went to Institute of Design in Cuba. Since then, I've been working both in as a graphic designer and currently as a creative director of an experiential agency and as well as an artist.
How have you been, during all this pandemic craziness? Are you actually working from home right now?
I am working from home, but actually when everything started, I was in Argentina.
Oh.
And I got stuck there for a month before I could make it back home.
Wow.
And I'm fortunate that I can work from home. So that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Were you working on a project there, or was it personal?
I'm always working on a project,
Okay.
but I didn't necessarily go to work on a project there.
Okay.
If I can take the laptop with me, then I'm probably working on a project.
Did you start as a photographer initially? Was photography your first medium of choice?
Photography was, and it still is. My father was a photographer, so I had that example when I was growing up. I always knew that. But soon enough, what happened is that I started transitioning from still photography, which I still do, but the need for the things that I wanted to say evolved to incorporate other mediums. From photography, it made sense to have motion. They're quite related. So motion video made it into the work that I do. And then eventually I wanted to have more interaction with the audience that was seeing the work itself. So then the next step was how to incorporate sensorial experiences into the work. I think at this point now, I am both going back to the basis of photography, but at the same time, I'm combining sensors, lighting, and some of the new things that I'm working on actually require controlled motion, so motors. And it's the combination of all those things that's quite fascinating to me.
And even when you create multimedia installations, I noticed that very often you like to be involved with the making of each piece, right? Down to how the wire is connected to a little light element.
For a long time, I struggled with the fact that many of the areas of work that I do are not necessarily considered to be art when you put them in another context. I cannot separate that part of the process from creating the work itself. That is my brush. That is what I use to make the work. So it's important to me that I can do it myself and that I understand what it takes to get the project done from all aspects. It's a way for me to controlling the output and controlling the ending result, knowing that every little area of the project is important and necessary to get to the final result.
You were chosen to be in the initial survey of American artists a few years ago. I think you had an interactive piece there that had to do with an apartment building.
That is correct.
Yes.
The work was called False Belief That the Control Resides in Me. And the idea of the work, me coming from Cuba and knowing the current political situation in Cuba, there's a false sense of control, but at the same time, I felt to an extent the same way here. So that project captured the individuality of the ways of life, but at the same time, how other presence alter that dynamic to an extent. So the physical manifestation of the work was a representation of a building. It had 24 apartments. Inside each one of those rooms were people living, and these are people from Cuba. I ended up using sensors to trigger a reaction if you got too close to the work. If you got too close to the work, from the conceptual point of view, you were invading the privacy of the inhabitants of that building. So they basically modified their behavior. They changed the behavior to react to the presence of the viewer.
Did you create 24 sets or have people acting the parts for that? It's a very complicated piece.
It was quite complicated, and yes, everything was filmed. It's video based, and everything was filmed ahead of time. So
Okay.
to an extent, yes, they were acting the part within their natural behavior at
Yes.
home. These were not actors necessarily.
Right.
As a matter of fact, both my grandfather and my grandmother are there, and they're not here anymore. So none of the people in the video were really actors. It's just I presented them with a situation, and I let them react however they choose to.
Yeah.
So it was both a experiment in interaction for me, as well as a documentation of the Cuba that I knew and left behind.
Yeah, I think you said somewhere that you were kind of amazed, I guess, in your experience of living in Jacksonville, I guess, how people could live so close together and not really know each other, which is so different than life in Cuba.
It is, no doubt, although I'm used to it by now. But it was one of the things that it was one of those cultural differences that really made me think about how different the realities are being relatively close to each other. Something also interesting happened in that project, which was that at the time, it was the first instance in which I used sensors and programming as a vehicle to deliver a body of work, a piece of work. I wasn't capable of programming that myself. Mm-hmm. So I was helped with the development of the software that basically ran the installation. But I felt that some connection between me and the work was missing. What I did after that is I took a pause from creating new work, because all the things that I wanted to make needed that knowledge of both the know-how, the technicality, the programming skills behind the scenes to make a creative idea come to life. I took a break to learn it until I actually did. And now I'm comfortable again. So it's quite rewarding to be back and involved in every aspect of the project, including that before I really couldn't do by myself.
And you were talking about a piece that you were working on or wanted to create for the Orlando Museum of Art exhibition, which involved I think people walking on a street and kind of compressing and decompressing their images.
Yes, and I can show you some of that, but it's quite interesting now. One of the things I've been doing since the last time we talked is that what I showed you at the time was a representation of what the idea was going to be. That representation, usually I do it as quickly as I can to make sure that the vision is actually coming through. And then it comes the technical part in which I'm actually developing and writing the code that make that works function and happen. So what I've been doing for the past couple of months is actually developing that installation in correlation with another piece that I have that is called the fragility of the promise. Mm-hmm. So I can show you some of that, a little bit of that behind the scene of how I'm merging the two pieces. And I'm also considering expanding this new section of the work, which is the one you're referring to, into its own separate exhibit. So this is part of the piece, the fragility of the promise. And when this work was created for a space that was quite tall. So I could separate the space between these rings significantly. But OMA doesn't offer that height of a ceiling. So I've been experimenting with how to install the work at OMA. And one of the solutions that I have is basically reducing the space in between the rings to basically create the same kind of experience, but allow for the piece to breathe within the space. And then if you see a little bit back here, another component that I'm planning to have at the museum is a projection on a wall that is a video-based project that deals with the current time represented by a passing video of the city and how the memory is stacked throughout time to the point that it basically disappears, and all that is left is a fragmented reality that is sometimes so far removed from the actual reality that it only resembles the reality. One of the things I've been exploring with is how to make the two pieces interact and work with each other. I'm thinking that it will be required to have two projectors. I definitely want to take more on a horizontal space, potentially the full length of a wall. And on the right side, you see the panning video on the city of Havana. And the video goes through a compression algorithm that stacks one pixel of the left side of the frame to create an image that is close to reality, but not quite, as it is in the frame of the video. There are certain random elements that make this particular visual. Some of those elements are based in time, and every once in a while you see a big image that fills the frame. So when that happens, and it just happens, so it's not going to happen quite again, basically that triggers all the lights in the sculpture to turn on as a way of recognition of the existence of the piece. And there's a subtle conversation between the lighting, the physical lighting in the space, and the projected lighting on the walls with the videos. This piece of work definitely addresses the idea of a memory and how a memory gets deconstructed and reconstructed over time. Since there's been more than 12 years since I left, and the Cuba that I remember, the Cuba that I lived in, has significantly changed over the course of that time. And while there is an aspect that I think I remember, in reality that is being transformed with my current experiences, and that's what this work is about. It's about the stacking memory and reconstructing memory to the point that is recognizable, but is not quite close to reality. I'm still in the process of editing the actual video, and the video will be about 30 minutes in length, but the image that it creates is ever changing. It happens in real time. It doesn't have a beginning or end. The installation, the way the things are stacked and created, and the sizes of the images, the collage that it leaves behind, it never repeats itself. It's always new.
Some kind of algorithm that works on it, or?
Correct.
So if you were to experience the video one day and then the next day would be different, wouldn't it?
It will feel slightly different, yes. And there's another component here that is the audio. There's an audio composition that right now goes along with both pieces of work, both the lighting installation and the projection part of the work. I work with a composer. The sounds is also reactive, and it changes, and it goes along with the both the behavior of the light and the timing and composition of the video.
As I understand, the light also responds to people in the gallery, in the room.
They do. There is a camera that sits right in the center, and is motion triggered, and that motion is translated into the lights. So it's not just the presence. You could arrive to that center place and not move at all, and it will not affect the lights. If you do move, then there is a translation of that movement into the lights.
It's almost intimidating, if you see what I mean. There's that notion that you're being seen by the artwork, right? Is that something that you've thought about, that you were interested in, the way people react when they're faced to technology, when they're faced to a camera, when their motion is acknowledged by an artwork?
I haven't put it in those exact words, but I guess it does have a relationship with that. More than anything, I do explore the sources of power and the things that are outside of your control that do have an influence in not just your life, but in society in general. So placing the viewer in a place that feels vulnerable to an extent, it is part of the intent of the work. More as an exploration of our own vulnerability. It's been an interesting realization of talking about fragility, how fragile our lives could be, especially in a situation like the one we have today with COVID-19. and the things that we should do responsibly to stay safe. The things that we should do are in direct contradiction with the things that I try to accomplish with my work, which is actually bringing people together. I don't know how that's going to affect my work, but I would imagine that it will at some point. And I do hope that things go back to normal as soon as possible. More than anything, it would probably mean that everybody's safe again. But the idea of creating work that brings people together, I think is important to sustain, especially as we get outside of this current situation. But also, I can see myself exploring and analyzing the opposite situation, what happens when we're not together. So I'm still listening to today. I don't know what I'm going to do with it tomorrow, but I'm sure it'll come through.
So many museums now are doing virtual exhibitions and, of course, things like this virtual studio visits. But I think everybody recognizes how important it is to be physically present with an artwork. I mean, it's really, there's no substitute for that. And I think certainly the Florida Prize and your work in particular are great examples of that. Really, I mean, to be in a space with that light structure suspended over your head and interacting with you, you know, something that's just, you know, very moving, would never come through in the same way on a screen.
It takes a lot of time to really have these works ready to be installed and functioning properly. It is interesting because the initial creation part of the process, it happens rather quickly in the time frame of the entire project. It happens really early in the stage. The seed of the idea is planted, and although it evolves, it really never goes too far away from that original idea. But there are so many elements to make something like this work properly that go both in the construction, the fabrication, and the installation of the work itself. But at the same time, behind the scenes, there's a software that runs these installations. And as a software has to be stable, has to be able to address and solve problems that could potentially present with any software. I need to be able to access it remotely if there's any kind of problem. So that part of the project, which is the least creative aspect of developing these installations, that takes quite some time. And it takes time to build it, test it, and make sure that it's ready to go out into an environment. Once I get to a technical execution that I find the right one for the particular project, a lot of the times I don't reuse it ever again, which I could. A lot of the times the next idea will require another set of developments or equipment or technical skills. And then I will have to allocate time to learn to make that happen before the idea actually comes to fruition. I hope that when I finish a piece of work, the technology becomes invisible and nobody really thinks about it too much, but they stop and think about what is being communicated with the work. If I don't accomplish that, then I think I failed with the work, and I don't think it has to do with the technology. It has to do more with the work that I put out. So yes, technology can change, but what I'm saying with the work itself is what should be important.
Right.
And of course, ideas are not timeless. Ideas also have a context in which they should be analyzed. So I guess as we continue living on and conversation shift to other topics, then the ideas could become irrelevant. But the way they're told is just also part of their time. And I hope they continue to evolve a long time with ourselves.
Well, it was great talking with you. Thank you for catching up with us.
Absolutely. Take care. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.